Amy, we really appreciate you being with us today, and especially as the Vice Chair of the Ag Committee in the House. Perhaps you can give us a little more information on the landscape of agriculture, and when we talk about food sovereignty, what is the reality of that?
So I'm going to start with what's happening in the legislature around agriculture. Just a brief overview of what we've done this last session. We put some goals in place with respect to local food consumption, so consumption of local food in our state institutions. We're looking at 30% as a goal for the DOE, and then 50% by 2050 for farm to state. Another really important legislative measure was relocating the farm to school coordinator for our public schools from the Department of Ag, which did not seem really energized around that program, to the Department of Education. I know that this was a session during a pandemic and we had no money to spend. We're still facing a really steep fiscal cliff. If we start really strengthening our procurement processes, so the way in which we get local food from our local farmers to our state institutions, like our public schools, our prisons, our hospitals, we can both strengthen local farming, sustainable local farming, and feed our kids and our most vulnerable really nutritious food. And we all know that locally produced nutritious food is really important and powerful, not just for learning, but for well-being and for connection back to our Aina, to feel connected to this place. The tools that I'm talking about are really the work that the nonprofits in Hawaii have already been doing around procurement, around helping small farmers connect to those institutions, to our state institutions, to recognize the need to, for example, retrain our cafeteria workers so that they go back to cooking from scratch. Right now, they're just opening cans from the continent, really, and reheating. So that's not great for our kids to be reliant on that kind of food. And you know, my community is all Title I schools, and you know what that means. And that means that those kids are food insecure. So we're not even talking about food sovereignty yet. Like, we're talking about the recognition that those children in our public schools, and our public schools, the majority of our public schools are Title I. So they are reliant on the food that's in the school cafeteria, maybe for their only hot meal of the day, or the one that they can rely upon. And the quality of that food matters so much.
When the procurement laws change, and they will, it means that there has to be a supply. How are we addressing that? The farmers being able to increase their supplies, more land being designated to ag?
I think I have two directions of effort, really, and one is regionalization. So looking at each island and the resources available in regions, because I think that if we become over-reliant on, for example, the Big Island for all of our produce, we have the same transportation costs, and that's a huge barrier for, meeting the budget requirements for our schools and for other state institutions. We don't get reimbursed at a very high level for these meals that are federally funded. So we don't have a lot of money to play with. That kind of affects our supply, because given the choice, many farmers are going to supply hotels and other tourist venues because they can get a higher profit margin. However, with the state institutions, they can have more stable multi-year contracts. And for some farmers, that's well worth the effort. By developing regionalized menus for the schools that really rely on what's grown locally, we can build in that stability. So farmers know what the market will be for the schools and for the hospitals and prisons, and they can plan accordingly. And we also are not, in my view, effectively using our state lands. So we can have a little bit more control over what farmers produce in those state lands. We can base our contracts on their willingness to produce for our state institutions, and we're not doing any of that. It's really a free market approach.
And your second concern and the area that you're focusing on?
I'd like to see us move more in the direction of state engagement around these efforts, state involvement. We've been very hands-off, and I'll just give you one example in terms of land use, because land is the most critical component of this whole conversation around agriculture. my community is adjacent to and includes the ADC lands, which are public lands, state lands, but we haven't done a good job in terms of really connecting what's being grown on public lands to our local needs for sustainability and for food sovereignty. So we need to make that connection, and we need to be, I think, more interventionist. We need to get directly engaged in having those conversations with farmers, allowing them to have leases if they are going to be producing for our schools and prisons and hospitals. I'm less interested in seeing production for export. I don't think it serves the common good here.
Political will depends on public will as well. And even though we can say buy local, we still have to produce local. What thoughts can you share in closing with the viewing audience that will encourage them to impact political will?
I think get engaged. Talk to your school principal. The principals matter so much, and talk to your legislator. We're all waiting for your calls. So that's important.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us and for your passion and your interest in this. And thank you for your service to the community.
Thank you, Lila.
We've just spoken with State Representative Amy Perruso of the 46th District.